The young and the restless spoilers in the dim light of a deserted warehouse on the outskirts of Genoa City, an atmosphere of dread permeated every corner. Phyllis lay slumped on a threadbare cot, her breaths shallow and uneven. The clock on the wall seemed to mock her with its relentless ticking, a reminder that only a few hours remained before the poison would claim her life. Without the antidote, which had yet to materialize or be mentioned by their captor, her chances of survival were dwindling by the minute. Across the room, hidden partially in the shadow of a rusted metal column, Sharon maintained an unervingly calm facade. Her eyes, however, betrayed a complex interplay of emotions, a blend of cold calculation and subtle malice. For anyone who had ever known Sharon, her outward politeness would have concealed any trace of bitterness. But tonight there was something undeniably off. Rumors, whispered in hushed tones among those who knew the darker recesses of Genoa City's underworld, had begun to circulate, a suggestion that Sharon might be far more dangerous than she appeared. In fact, credible information pointed to the unthinkable, that Sharon had poisoned Phyllis herself. Phyllis, though weakened by her rapidly failing condition, clung stubbornly to the belief that she and Sharon were allies in a twisted game of survival. Their mutual captivity had forced them into an uneasy alliance. Each had their own dark past, secrets they preferred to keep hidden from the world, but in this crucible of terror, they had no choice but to rely on each other. And yet, beneath the surface of this precarious bond, Sharon harbored a deep, seething hatred for Phyllis, a hatred that had festered long before this night of terror. Sharon's exterior mask of concern was nothing more than a carefully constructed ruse, a deceptive charade to lull Phyllis into a false sense of security. As the minutes ticked by, the reality of their predicament began to crystallize. The kidnappers? An unknown group with ambiguous motives had clearly lost interest in any notion of rescue or even negotiation. Their silence regarding the antidote was deafening. They provided no clues, no morsel of information that could guide Phyllis to salvation. It was as if they had abandoned their victims, leaving them to succumb to a fate that was preordained long ago. But even in the midst of despair, a sinister plot was unfolding. Sharon, with her calculating mind, had devised a plan that went far beyond mere survival. Her true intention was to eliminate Phyllis and, in doing so, remove any obstacle to her own ultimate ascent. To Sharon, having Phyllis alive was a constant reminder of a past rivalry, a thorn in her side that could never be fully excised. Tonight, she resolved, would mark a turning point. She would ensure that Phyllis's death was not an unfortunate accident but a meticulously orchestrated event. By covertly collaborating with the captors, Sharon planned to let them administer the lethal poison, a poison that she had secretly arranged, one that would mimic a random act of violence. Later, when the dust settled and the authorities were called, the incident would be dismissed as the tragic outcome of a botched kidnapping, with Sharon herself cast as a victim of circumstance. In her mind, the plan was elegantly simple. First, she would subtly steer the captors into believing that Phyllis was the real target. With every carefully measured word and action, she planted seeds of suspicion, ensuring that any investigation would point away from her and directly at Phyllis. Her eyes flicked repeatedly to Phyllis, who, though visibly weakened, still exuded a desperate kind of hope. Phyllis had no inkling of Sharon's duplicity. She continued to plead quietly for the antidote, hoping that their captors might be persuaded to provide it or that a stroke of luck might bring help. In her weakened state, trust was a luxury she could ill afford to dispense, yet she found herself clinging to the alliance with Sharon, a partnership forged in the crucible of danger, but ultimately founded on a shaky bed of shared desperation. Meanwhile, the silence of the warehouse was punctuated by the occasional clink of metal and distant echoes that seemed to signify the approach of fate itself. Sharon's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Every tick of the clock was a countdown not only to Phyllis's demise but also to the moment when her own meticulously laid plans would be set into motion. She had calculated every possible outcome, convinced that once Phyllis was out of the way, her position would be secure. With Phyllis gone, Sharon could vanish into the night, her hands ostensibly stained by nothing more than the chaos of a failed abduction. Yet, the plan was not without its risks. Phyllis's inherent resilience had always been her greatest asset, a quality that Sharon had underestimated. As the hours slipped by, Phyllis began to stir weakly, murmuring incoherent words about betrayal and survival. Her mind, though clouded by the poison, was slowly piecing together fragments of a puzzle that was far more sinister than she had ever imagined. In the faint light, a flash of recollection returned to her, a whispered conversation, half-forgotten details that now took on a new, horrifying clarity. Could it be that the person she had been relying on, the one who had shared in her struggles until now, was the architect of her impending doom? With every labored breath, Phyllis's inner strength grew. She summoned the last reserves of her willpower and began to challenge the narrative that had been imposed upon her. Despite the odds, she resolved to fight, not only against the poison that ravaged her body but also against the betrayal that lurked in the heart of her supposed ally. The warehouse, once a symbol of her captivity, transformed into a battleground of wills. In that cramped, oppressive space, the clash of destinies became all the more poignant. Outside, the night wore on, indifferent to the dramas unfolding within. The city slept, oblivious to the web of treachery spun in a forgotten corner. The captors, seemingly indifferent to the complexities of human emotion, went about their grim tasks with mechanical precision. Yet, even they were not immune to the irony of fate. Unbeknownst to them, every action they took was being manipulated by Sharon's cunning hand, a hand that was slowly sealing Phyllis's fate. And as Sharon's internal monologue spiraled, she could not help but revel in the twisted satisfaction of her carefully orchestrated deceit. But fate, as it often does in the darkest of times, had a way of revealing its own hidden justice. The very plan that Sharon had believed would grant her ultimate control was beginning to unravel. Phyllis, despite her apparent vulnerability, was fighting not just for her life but for the truth. Her senses sharpened with every passing moment, and the realization of betrayal struck her with a force that belied her frail condition. Determined not to become a martyr in a cruel game, Phyllis mustered a clarity of purpose that was both heartbreaking and heroic. She began to piece together the scattered clues, a subtle shift in Sharon's demeanor, the lingering hesitation when discussing the mysterious poison, and the inexplicable relief that flashed across her face when the subject of the antidote was raised. In that dim warehouse, time was both an enemy and an ally. As the seconds melted away, Phyllis resolved to unmask the treachery that had led them both to this dire moment. She whispered pleas into the silence, calling out for help, for understanding, and, most importantly, for the truth to come to light. Her voice, though weak, carried the weight of a lifetime of betrayal and resilience. A testament to a spirit unwilling to surrender, even when the odds were stacked overwhelmingly against her. The cruel irony was palpable. Sharon's plan was to use the kidnapper as an unwitting instrument of murder, to let the poison seal Phyllis's fate without implicating herself. Later, when the dust settled and the authorities arrived, the scene would be carefully orchestrated to suggest that both women were victims of an elaborate crime. But the truth, hidden behind layers of deception, would eventually emerge, a truth that would expose the depths of Sharon's malice and the desperate struggle for survival that had defined these fateful hours. As the night deepened and the final moments ticked away, the warehouse bore silent witness to a confrontation that was as inevitable as it was tragic. In those fleeting moments before destiny took its final course, every gesture, every whispered word, and every hidden glance became a part of a tapestry of betrayal and redemption. Phyllis's struggle, though seemingly futile against the ravages of poison and treachery, stood as a testament to the enduring human spirit, a spirit that would not be silenced, even in the face of unspeakable cruelty. In the end, as the first hints of dawn began to pierce the darkness, the warehouse was left with more questions than answers. Sharon's carefully constructed facade had cracked just enough to reveal a glimpse of the monster within, while Phyllis's unwavering determination shone like a beacon of truth amidst the chaos. The stage was now set for a revelation that promised to shake the foundations of everything they had known, a revelation where alliances would be shattered, secrets would come to light, and the true cost of survival would be paid in full. Thus, in the quiet aftermath of that harrowing night, as the police eventually arrived and the grim reality of the situation took hold, the faces of those involved told a story far more horrifying than any could have imagined. The evil in their expressions was unmistakable, a silent testimony to the depths of betrayal and the enduring struggle for power and survival in a world where trust was a luxury, and every smile hid a dagger in the back. In the stifling gloom of the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Genoa City, time had become both an enemy and a silent judge. Phyllis lay on a cold metal cot, her heart pounding in her chest with the realization that her predictions might finally be coming true. The poison coursing through her veins had left her with only a few hours to live if the antidote wasn't found in time. But something darker was brewing beneath the surface, a web of betrayal that bound her fate to Sharon's, a bond that was destined to unravel in the most violent way imaginable. For weeks, Phyllis had harbored suspicions about Sharon's true intentions. Every subtle gesture, every slight nuance in her tone had built a damning picture in Phyllis's mind. If her predictions were correct, then nothing could excuse the inevitable truth. There would be no more explanations, no more second chances, only the cold reality that she and Sharon would never forgive one another. The silence of their captors only amplified the tension in the room. They offered no clues about the elusive antidote, as if they had abandoned their victims in a cruel twist of fate, leaving the two women to settle their own scores. Phyllis's anger was not solely born of impending death, but also of a deep-rooted grievance. It was Sharon who, in her eyes, had indirectly caused Heather's untimely demise, a tragedy that had haunted them both for far too long. In a desperate attempt to forge a semblance of unity, Phyllis had once forgave Sharon so that they could survive together. But now, that fragile forgiveness was crumbling, overtaken by a bitter realization: Sharon's ruthlessness had never truly waned. In fact, it had only grown colder, more calculated, as if each moment of shared peril was designed to reveal her true, unyielding nature. The atmosphere in the warehouse grew even more oppressive as Phyllis's voice, raw with emotion, suddenly broke through the tension. "Why do you want to kill me?" she bellowed, her tone a mixture of incredulity and searing pain. Her outburst cut through the oppressive silence like a knife, exposing the depth of her inner turmoil. The question was not one of mere survival but a desperate plea for clarity, an attempt to understand why their doomed alliance had devolved into a contest of betrayal and bloodshed. Sharon's response was silent at first, her expression unreadable in the low light. When she finally spoke, her voice was devoid of any remorse, laced only with the steely determination of someone who had long ago accepted that survival was a zero-sum game. "This isn't about forgiveness or redemption," she stated coolly. "It's a game of survival, a contest where only one of us can live to see the dawn. There is no other way out." With those words, Sharon revealed a chilling truth. The partnership they had once relied on was nothing more than a facade, a temporary alliance forged in desperation rather than trust. Phyllis's mind raced as she struggled to reconcile the woman she once knew with the merciless predator now standing before her. Every memory of their past, the whispered promises of solidarity in times of despair, the shared laughter amid tears, was now tainted by a bitter betrayal. The irony was palpable. Phyllis, who had once planned to end Sharon's life for causing Heather's death, now found herself questioning whether Sharon's intentions were even more sinister. Had the balance of power shifted? Was Sharon really the one aiming for Phyllis's demise? The warehouse, with its peeling walls and scattered debris, became the setting for a dramatic confrontation where every second was fraught with peril. Phyllis's pulse hammered in her ears as she realized that if her predictions held true, she would soon have no means to defend herself, no alibi, no plea that could change the course of events. The stakes had escalated beyond personal grudges, they now revolved around the very essence of survival. Every decision, every moment of hesitation, could be the difference between life and death. Sharon's eyes flickered with a hint of what might have once been regret, but it was quickly replaced by the steely resolve of a woman who had long abandoned compassion. "We are forced to do this," she murmured, almost to herself, as if the words were a mantra against the overwhelming odds. "In this game, only one of us can walk away. There's no middle ground." Her voice, measured and unervingly calm, left little room for argument. It was as if she believed that fate itself had decreed that their paths would diverge in the most brutal fashion imaginable. Amidst the simmering confrontation, a grim reality began to set in for Phyllis. The alliance they had once cherished was irreparably fractured, a casualty of past sorrows and the relentless pursuit of survival. Every glance exchanged between them was laden with memories of what had been sacrificed along the way. Phyllis's anger was now intermingled with a deep sense of loss, the loss of a potential bond, the loss of hope that they might have overcome their tragic past together. As the poison continued to ravage her body, Phyllis's thoughts turned to the possibility of salvation. Could she, in the face of such overwhelming betrayal and the relentless march of time, be saved? The question haunted her like a specter in the darkness. In the silence that followed Sharon's chilling declaration, Phyllis's mind was flooded with memories of Heather, a gentle soul whose life had been extinguished by the indirect consequences of Sharon's actions. Heather's memory was both a source of sorrow and a reminder of why Phyllis had once been willing to forgive. But now, that forgiveness was nothing more than a shattered relic of a bygone era, replaced by an unyielding determination to survive and uncover the truth. In the tense moments that followed, Phyllis's body began to tremble with the weight of her conflicted emotions. She was caught in a paradox of desire. On one hand, she wished to live, to somehow claw her way out of this treacherous game. On the other, she longed for retribution against the woman who had betrayed her trust and indirectly caused Heather's death. The conflicting urges warred within her, each demanding dominance. And yet, amid the chaos of her thoughts, one question persisted like a refrain: would she be saved, or was her fate already sealed by the cruel machinations of destiny? As the first hints of dawn crept in through the grimy windows of the warehouse, a palpable tension filled the air. Every whispered breath, every murmur of regret and determination, underscored the harsh reality that there could be no turning back. Phyllis's internal struggle reached its zenith as she realized that if Sharon's plan succeeded, there would be no redemption, no chance for either of them to escape the cycle of hatred and betrayal that had defined their lives. The captors, seemingly indifferent to the emotional turmoil unfolding before them, continued their silent vigil, their presence a constant reminder of the cruelty that had brought Phyllis and Sharon to this point. With no sign of the antidote and the specter of impending death looming ever closer, Phyllis's thoughts raced toward a desperate hope, one that defied the bleak reality of their situation. In that fraught moment, as she clutched at the remnants of her strength, Phyllis silently vowed that if she were to be saved, it would be through a final act of defiance. A confrontation that would expose every lie, every betrayal, and ultimately determine who was truly deserving of life. In the midst of this internal and external chaos, the warehouse transformed into a battleground of wills and ideologies. The unspoken truth was that neither woman could be redeemed by mere survival. One of them had to perish for the cruel game to be complete. And so, as the tension reached its breaking point, Phyllis's desperate plea echoed into the void, mingling with the chill of the early morning air. "Why do you want to kill me?" she repeated, her voice hoarse yet defiant, a final challenge hurled into the darkness. Sharon's response was a silent, steely gaze that spoke volumes, a gaze that confirmed her belief that this brutal contest was the only way to secure her own survival. In that charged moment, both women were irrevocably transformed. Their past forgiveness, once a beacon of hope amid despair, was now a bitter memory replaced by the inescapable reality of their divergent paths. The game was on, and only one could emerge from this deadly dance unscathed. So, will Phyllis be saved? The answer lingered uncertainly in the cold air of the warehouse. With every heartbeat marking the countdown to oblivion, the struggle for survival had become more than a battle against poison. It was a war against betrayal, a fight for the truth that lay hidden beneath layers of deceit. In the end, the final outcome would depend on whether Phyllis could summon the strength to outwit the relentless ambition of Sharon, or whether fate, with its cruel and inexorable logic, would consign her to the same tragic end as so many before her. As the sun began its slow ascent, illuminating the dark corners of the warehouse and casting long shadows on the remnants of hope, the scene was set for a climax that would shake the foundations of their lives. In the brutal contest between mercy and ruthlessness, only one question remained unanswered. A question that would soon be decided by the unforgiving hand of destiny.